Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So it's late October right now, and most wild edibles have sort of come and gone. But one that's just getting started, just sprouting, is this field garlic right here. Now I've talked about this wild edible before. In fact, it was one of my first videos. And I do plan to go back to that topic and make another updated wild edibles video of this wild edible at a later date, because one, I didn't even get the correct name right. Now, if that sounds bad, keep in mind this is one of the most common wild edibles that people know of. I learned about this wild edible when I was very, very young, and since everyone has a different name for what this is, it's kind of hard to look up on the internet. So yes, this is called field garlic. Not wild green onions, not wild garlic, but field garlic. So all that aside, this is an invasive wild edible with a very strange and advantageous growth cycle. You see, it sprouts young in the fall, weathers the winter underneath the snow, and then matures, grows up, and flowers during the spring. This means that during the otherwise difficult to survive seasons of later fall and winter, this is a staple wild edible that could keep you going. Today I will be picking a few bunches of the green parts of the plant and turning them into a wonderful broth. So why just the green parts? Well, you see, when the field garlic is young like this, the bulb underneath is not very substantial and it's difficult to clean. But if you just take this and pull it upward, you'll see a little bit of white comes off and out, but it's perfectly clean. There's no dirt on that. That way you don't have to waste any time trying to get these clean. You can just pick them and head back and cook them. And when you get big bunches like this, you can just sort of tear it up like grass. That's wonderful. It's important to note that this is an invasive plant. I wouldn't really recommend doing this to a native plant because it is a bit of a destructive and, some could argue, wasteful method of collecting a wild edible. But in the case of a very aggressive, invasive plant, that's exactly what it needs to keep it under control. So that's probably a good enough clump of onions for 1 or 2 people for a meal. And it should smell very strongly of onions. That's a good sign that it's edible in the right plant. If it doesn't smell very strongly of onions at this point, you've probably made a mistake. Now I will be cooking and prepping this indoors on a stove. I'll be washing it. In a survival situation, that's not what you're going to be able to do. You should probably just stick it in a pot of water, clean potable water, and boil it over a fire. So back indoors, and well, the recipe for this soup is very simple in that there really is no recipe. You just take all this spindly onions, and mind you, this smells ridiculously strong of onion, and either chop them up with a knife, or tear them up into smaller pieces, or do none of that. All you really need to do is boil this in some water for a decent amount of time, and then maybe add some salt. So that looks about good to me. I just tore the onions by hand as opposed to using a knife. Less to clean. Now all that's left to do is to cover these in water and put them on the boil. Alright, so that looks like enough water for now. Might have to add more while it's cooking. And now all that's left is to put this on the boil for however long you want to boil it. Alright, once it's on the boil, just turn it down to a gentle, steady simmer and let it cook. Alright, now that it's cooked for a little while, I'm going to start adding a little bit of salt until I'm satisfied with how salty it is. If you're out in the woods, you don't have salt, sucks, but in a survival situation, you gotta eat what you gotta eat. When you're at home, add salt and make it taste good. Alright, so it's getting right about done, and as you can see, it's reduced down quite a bit. It used to be right a little bit under that half a quart mark, right on the other side of the pot. This soup is done once it's reduced down to your liking, and the field garlic greens are tender and delicious. Alright, that's done. Turn the stove off and let it cool. One more optional ingredient you can add as the soup cools, if you have it and you're at home, is a little bit of butter. That just sort of Adds a little bit of fat, rounds out the dish, and the fat actually helps your body absorb some of the vitamins. Alright, so here I've got some of the onions. Let's see if you can see that a little better. Yeah, it's mostly the greens. Unfortunately, I don't have a spoon, except for this big wooden one. Works for mac and cheese, less for soup, but hey, we'll just have to make it work. But anyway, the vegetables are the most important part of the soup anyway, so let's dig in. Very oniony, and they also have a bit of a cabbage-like flavor, which is good in a soup. The broth is also rather good and quite sippable. Unfortunately, to sip it in a large stainless steel pot, I need both hands, so it's kind of hard to film that, but trust me, it is quite good. And in a survival situation, granted you won't have the salt and butter, but hey, it's not bad. And in terms of foraging, keep in mind this cost essentially $0. The onions don't cost anything, the water costs tenths of a penny, the butter, I only used a small amount and that wasn't all too expensive, so this entire meal is probably coming out to several cents worth of actual input. The texture of the soup is also good. The onions tend to clump together, and when they do, they're tender and juicy. And as I said before, this is sort of a bare minimum. You can add other stuff to this, potatoes, whatever's available, and it'll come out great. This is just the base. And even as the bare minimum, as nutrition, I would gladly eat this in a survival situation. And if you're trying to save a buck, it's not too bad either. At any rate, hope you've all enjoyed. See ya.